injury prevention. It's up to you. In 2009, an industry workshop was held that focused on the role and importance of the Job Safety Analysis, or JSA. The JSA is one of several hazard identification and risk assessment tools used by the mining industry. Conducted by Noetic Solutions, the workshop emphasised the need for an industry consensus on the definition and appropriate application of an effective JSA. In consideration of the outcome of this industry workshop, a guidance note was developed by the Queensland Mines Inspectorate to clarify what a JSA is, to advise when to use it, how to develop it, and where it fits into the risk management process. The purpose of this presentation is to support the release of the guidance note on effective job safety analysis to prevent work-related incidents, injuries and illness in the mining industry. Risk management. Life is full of risk. From the moment we wake up in the morning to the time we leave our home and journey to work, we've already encountered a number of hazards and potential risks. The question is, how do we go about managing these risks? Risk management is something that we do every day, whether we are aware of it or not. In order to navigate safely throughout our daily lives, at work, and even in the comfort of our own homes, we observe the hazards and possible risks that surround us. Being aware of hazards and resultant risks means that we can then apply measures to eliminate or reduce those risks. Although a simple process, risk management is critical and requires great attention and mindfulness in order for it to be effective. Before undertaking any task, stop and think. Ask yourself, what am I about to do? What could go wrong? What can I do to control the risk? Risks are involved in crossing the road, driving or walking to work, travelling by aircraft. At work, there are a whole new set of hazards and risks that we need to be aware of. Whether we are working at a mine or in an office, we often have to work on complex jobs that involve a number of potentially dangerous or hazardous job steps and resultant risks. In these cases, extra caution and vigilance needs to be applied in the identification and management of those risks. What is a job safety analysis? The JSA is a basic and low-level task-oriented risk assessment tool that is used for both routine and non-routine job and task planning. It is an analysis that should be applied by a work team prior to commencement of a potentially hazardous activity. It is a qualitative method that uses job observation and workers' experience as the basis for identifying hazards and risk controls to be used. A JSA uses a form and must be documented. The purpose of a JSA is to help the work team develop effective, safe work expectations, such as guidelines, procedures, standard work instructions or SWIs, and job plans. Being a low-level tool, however, a JSA is not enough on its own, and more than likely, other procedures will need to be applied to the risk management process to properly review the level of risk involved in a task. Carrying out an effective JSA before any work begins is imperative to the safety of both personnel and equipment. Used properly, a JSA can be a useful safety tool. A poorly conducted JSA, however, may not only be ineffective in preventing injury, but could also possibly increase the level of risk involved in the job. This is because the inadequate JSA that, for example, has failed to identify critical hazards and suitable risk controls can be dangerously misleading. If workers and employees on the job believe that a proper risk assessment has been conducted and that all suitable risk controls have been identified, this can create a false sense of security, and could therefore be a contributing factor to a serious incident or injury. If a job is considered to be high risk by the supervisor or the team during personal pre-start checks, a formal risk assessment as appropriate, other than a JSA, such as a RAC, should be conducted by the work team. Risk assessment tools. In order to prevent injury and maintain a safe working environment, there are several hazard identification and risk assessment tools that, when utilised efficiently, can help to properly identify and analyse any potential hazards involved in any job or task. The hierarchy of these assessment tools is based on the level of complexity involved. For instance, the bow tie analysis is a specialist analysing tool used to identify both existing and new control and recovery measures for high-risk events. It is a powerful representation of a hazard analysis and is readily understood at all levels in an organisation. The bow tie analysis sits at the top of the risk assessment tool hierarchy. Workplace Risk Assessment and Control, or RAC, is a commonly used hazard identification and risk assessment tool. It is a systematic process for identifying potential production or maintenance incidents and losses, and uses a matrix approach to define risk levels from estimates of consequence and likelihood. For best results, a RAC must be done by a relevant cross-section of mine personnel, using a formal, step-by-step method that leads them through examining the operation or process under review. The RAC process sits above the job safety analysis in the risk assessment tool hierarchy. The job safety analysis sits at the bottom of the hierarchy, above the individual informal risk assessment tools. Case study. Serious accidents have occurred where a seemingly safe and routine act has coincided with unpredicted hidden hazards. On the 2nd of September 2008, a drill rig maintenance job at an open pit mine in Queensland resulted in a serious incident, severely injuring an employee. The maintenance worker was injured when 9 metres of heavy feed chain fell on him from an approximate height of 20 metres. How did this happen? The investigation found that the feed chain on the drill rig, which was dismantled from the machine during maintenance, had been left unrestrained and, in combination with a creeping hydraulic cylinder, created a secondary hazardous condition. The loss in hydraulic pressure in the lift ram that caused the cylinder to creep allowed the chain to retract back with the cylinder. This movement, coupled with other factors, allowed a gradual change in weight distribution of the chain on the mast. Finally, this allowed the chain to rapidly descend, running off a freewheeling sprocket at the top of the mast, and caused the injury to the maintenance worker, who was welding on the platform immediately below the mast. The worker suffered serious injuries to his head, his upper back and left hand. The extent of his injuries included a fractured skull, 3 fractured vertebrae, significant crush injuries to his left hand, a punctured lung and a number of broken ribs. The investigation also found that as a result of inadequate work processes and passive supervision, hazards were not identified and ineffective risk controls applied. JSA Preparation. As previously stressed, it is important to do a JSA properly in order for it to be effective. Therefore, initially working with your team away from the job site will allow complete focus without the disruption of activity on site or other factors that may distract, such as feeling rushed for time when a job is soon to be scheduled. Once filled out, the JSA form should then be taken and checked by an inspection of the job site, task or equipment. This is essential in ensuring that all risks have been identified and properly recorded and that nothing has been missed. JSA Resources. It is vital that the work team has all the appropriate resources for developing the JSA. It is the supervisor's responsibility to make sure that the right people plus all relevant material and information are made available. Resources include sufficient time to conduct the JSA and an appropriate team experienced with the task. A clear definition of the scope of the job to be analysed. The right people, skills and competencies required to carry out the job safely. Hazard prompt checklists and previously completed JSAs. Relevant incident reports, company policies and risk registers. Safety alerts or bulletins. OEM, original equipment manufacturers, drawings, manuals and procedures. Specialist supplier information or material safety data sheet, MSDS. Australian and New Zealand standards or international standards and relevant codes of practices. And relevant regulatory requirements. JSA Team. Everybody involved in the job task should participate in creating the JSA. The more minds and the more years of experience applied to analysing the hazards in a job, the more successful the work group will be in deciding on suitable and effective hazard and risk controls. Everyone has a responsibility to participate in the creation of the JSA. The following people should be involved in the development of a JSA: experienced team leader or supervisor with job-specific knowledge and competency in conducting and writing a JSA. Persons with hands-on knowledge and expertise of the job for which the JSA is being performed. Equipment operator, fitter, etc. Manager, superintendent or engineer. Technical experts. Facilitator. Safety and health professional. Hazard identification. When developing a JSA, it is important to ensure that the job is broken down into the basic job steps. The team must also agree on effective safety controls for each step. It is important not to make these steps too general, as this may lead to important details being missed, and as a result, the failure to identify some hazards. Look at each step in detail. In each step of the job, the hazard identification must be done as per Section 6 of the Mining and Quarrying Safety and Health Regulation 2001, having regard to visible or obvious hazards. Heat. Noise. Working at heights. Dust. Mobile equipment. Slips, trips and falls. Environmental conditions. Manual handling. Hidden hazards, by looking beyond the obvious. Stored energy. Falling object. Explosion and or fire. Compressed air. Developing hazards. These are the hazards that can emerge as a result of work activity in each step, and also due to changes in the environment. Release of hydraulic fluid lowering a suspended boom. Leaking jackleg cylinder. Hydraulic hose failure that could result in a high-pressure oil injection injury. Hazards that have low initial consequence, but over time the consequence may change or increase. Build-up of gas following maintenance activities, potential risk of gas explosion. Hydraulic oil on turbo, considerable fire hazard that could result in the machine being lost. Fuel line failure. This is also a considerable fire hazard. Remember, there is no such thing as a generic JSA. All JSAs must be approached with vigilance and mindfulness, and it is not good enough to simply recycle a previously compiled JSA. Also, it is not enough to just list all obvious hazards. Looking further afield for the more hidden or secondary dangers is just as vital, and it is in fact paramount in securing a safe working environment, taking all potential risks into account and applying appropriate risk controls. The JSA can be completed by a team with or without the participation of the supervisor. However, the supervisor is required to review and sign off the JSA where appropriate. Job Safety Analysis 101. In light of past and recent incidents, an apparent need has developed for industry to apply the highest order of risk controls to avoid repeat occurrences. All accidents, injuries, fatalities and occupational exposures are preventable, and, with the goal of zero harm in the mining industry, any incident that compromises the safety of personnel is unacceptable. As we have learned from this video, a JSA is not just a tick and flick exercise. Vigilance on behalf of both supervisors and workers is paramount to completing an effective JSA and in being able to spot any unseen or secondary hazards. Most importantly, everyone involved in the work must know about the risks involved and the measures that need to be taken to avoid those risks. Remember, don't use JSAs as the default primary tool to identify hazards and controls when the job has the potential for serious injuries, illness, equipment damage, or environmental harm. A JSA should only be applied to a job when the hazards and resultant risks are known to be low, there is no procedure or SWI, or when developing, modifying, or reviewing a procedure or SWI. As a minimum, a good JSA requires input from an experienced team comprising a supervisor with job-specific knowledge and persons with hands-on knowledge and expertise in the job described by the JSA. All JSAs require sign-off by a job-experienced and JSA-trained supervisor. JSAs are only valid for the job at hand and must not simply be recycled from job to job. To ensure hazards and resultant risks are properly captured and addressed, JSAs should be performed or reviewed at the work or job site prior to carrying out the job. Ensure the JSA team has the necessary resources available to compile the JSA. Skill, sufficient time, JSA form or worksheet, including appropriate hazard prompt checklists, etc. When undertaking a JSA, do not only consider the basic issues such as slips and trips, but also the primary hazards that exist in the job. These may be from potentially damaging sources or energy, gravitational, kinetic, thermal, mechanical, chemical, and electrical, and those that are created or released as the job progresses. Although the focus of this video has been on developing an effective JSA, It is important to note that all levels of risk management are equally important in overall safety and health management. Stop and think. Risk management is something we do every day. Whether you are signing a contract, reversing out of a driveway, borrowing money from the bank, or crossing the road, we need to apply the same risk management tools to each event. Stop and think. What am I about to do? What could go wrong? What can I do to control the risk? At work, and in situations where the risk factors are more complex, it is especially important to stop and think. The truth is, everyone has a role to play. Job safety involves teamwork, and it is up to everyone to be involved. We are all responsible for preventing injuries to ourselves and others. Imagine the impact an injury, illness, or fatality could have on your family, friends, and colleagues. Before you are about to start a task, stop and think. What am I about to do? What could go wrong? What can I do to control the risk? Workers can help by following the correct procedures and by asking for help when needed. Supervisors can help by enforcing JSA procedures and ensuring adequate resources are available for all involved. Everyone is empowered to stop unsafe behaviour. Stop and think about potential injuries and incidents so you can return home safely from work every day. No task is so important that it cannot be done safely.